Hello, Dogg from Air fans. This video is going to be about the feasibility of a coronavirus vaccine or the lack thereof. It's really starting to look like the cure is going to be worse than the disease in terms of this current COVID-19 crisis, and I'm looking towards the potential for a mandatory vaccination rollout and what that might entail. So I wanted to look into whether or not a vaccine for a coronavirus mind you, existed or had ever existed or would even work, and I found basically no, but I'm going to go into that a little bit more in depth. So first of all, I had to look into some basic evidence on vaccines and studies based on vaccines, and what the science had to say about vaccines in general. And I know I'm going to be late to the party here, but I was gobsmacked to learn that no, in fact, there are no double-blind studies for the effectiveness of vaccines. Well, there's a few, but they're very poor quality. The point there is that the amount of work or the amount of regulation that goes into approving a vaccine for human use is so much lower than the amount of work that goes into approving a drug, a pharmaceutical, that it's just nuts. There's nothing to say about vaccines, whether they work or not. There's no long-term studies of vaccines. So, like for example, the Ebola vaccine just got approved here in December of last year, December 2019. It had been in the works since I think 2016, but it was the FDA process took 6 months. 6 months for the Ebola vaccine. So what you know if you get that vaccine is that you're good for 6 months. After that, who knows? And you got to think about that going forward with this coronavirus vaccine. So whatever time frame they give us, whether it's 3 months or 12 months or 18 months, that's all you know. You know you're going to be, statistically, you're not going to get, vaccine damaged for that time period. So, I mean, that's just crazy, though. That's not what they do for drugs. That's not, it's just really poor science by any estimation. I'm sorry, it's just, wow, it's dumb. I'm going to say dumb a lot in this video because this is just some dumb stuff I'm looking at. All right. So number one, they don't do double-blind studies. The standard of science is very low. The standard of research and regulation is very low for vaccines. Number two, there's no liability to vaccine manufacturers. So that just right there throws the whole thing out the window, in my opinion. And that was established. This is law in the United States, at least. It's called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. It was passed in 1986. And this established an entirely separate legal system for vaccine manufacturers. And the legal justification for this act was even to say that it was too expensive to develop vaccines, and so we needed to reduce the liability to the manufacturers, or we just wouldn't have any more vaccines, and that would be a real bummer. So here we are. And so what happens if you are vaccine damaged? Because you can be vaccine damaged, the government will admit it, or your child can be vaccine damaged. What happens is you have to go through a no-fault process, it's called. So you waive your right to sue the vaccine creator or manufacturer, and in turn you can be eligible for a small sum of money, but you can't sue them. We can't, as American citizens, sue a vaccine manufacturer for, liability in the same way that we can sue a drug manufacturer for liability. So, if you think that that the science is settled or anything like that, fight me. It's dumb. The whole thing is just dumb. Crazily dumb. I'm over here just shocked reading this stuff, and my wife's way ahead of the curve, compared to me on this stuff. I'm just kind of catching up. But yeah, the science is not there. One thing I looked at is the number of subjects in a vaccine study compared to a drug clinical trial. Okay, so the biggest one I found for a vaccine study was around 1,000 people, 1,000 subjects. So that's like 500 in each group, 500 in the study group, 500 in the control group. The average number of subjects in a pharmaceutical trial in 1995, I found, was 4,237 people. So at least 4 times bigger. But, none of that matters because they don't have any liability. So they have no reason to produce science, defending their position. They have no position. They're legally not required to have a position. They're not required to defend themselves because they can't be held liable. I mean, sorry, I'm blubbering here, but this is just crazy, dumb stuff. So I looked at a few studies, and they're all just terrible. If you find a good one, send it my way, and I'll read it, and then I'll just laugh at you because they don't exist. But I looked at some of these like things online where you submit answers, like I think answers.com, Quora.com, to see just what kind of people were saying about this, about the vaccine debate. I found that it fell into one of 4 groups. So the first group was saying, there are no double-blind vaccine trials. That's number 1. Number 2 was saying, yes, there are double-blind trials. You just haven't read them because you're a scientific illiterate. Here is the URL. So that's an ad hominem. The third group said, of course there are no double-blind trials because that would be unethical because you would be leaving half of the people undefended from the vaccine. So that's really interesting. So, one group is saying, of course they are these trials. The other one is saying, of course there aren't these trials. But they're both in support of vaccines, of course. And then the fourth group is just people saying, yeah, I actually read those studies from those URLs that you posted, and they're very poor quality, very low sample size. The length of time that they were looking for negative symptoms or negative responses to the vaccines was very short. Like I looked at one that took 8 days. So it's just ridiculous. So then saying that, does that make me an anti-vaxxer? Does it make someone who has the opposing position a pro-vaxxer? And I gotta say, that's dumb. Again, this is just dumb stuff. Anytime someone is trying to break things down to you and saying there's a yes or a no, there's a black or a white, it's just don't buy into that. Because principally what you're doing in that position is you're giving up your power to make decisions. So you're going to say, I'm going to side with this party in this situation, regardless of what the situation entails. You got to be able to look at least at every single vaccine, every single disease, and conduct a cost-benefit analysis on that individual disease. So, it's the same with Republican versus Democrat. It's just, please, I've done a lot of research, and I'm going to do a ton of videos on this kind of thing, but just don't buy into the black or white Hegelian dialectic nonsense on the vaccine issue or any issue. And if someone tries to trap you into that, just, walk away. It's just dumb, 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 dumb stuff. So, having said all that, what is the basic reason that there is no coronavirus vaccine, nor has there ever been one? There's no MERS vaccine, there's no SARS vaccine. Basically, it's that these are common cold viruses. They mutate too fast. So you get a good vaccine that works 1 year, it's just not going to work the next year. So it's whereas a flu strain, rotates, comes back in the next couple of years, the common cold viruses do not. They mutate too fast for a vaccine to be effective over more than 1 year. And there's other technical considerations there that are very interesting. But the point is that they are, I don't know if I'm going to say they're insurmountable. Again, it doesn't matter because vaccines haven't been ever demonstrated to work. So anyway, the thing about these MERS and SARS is there are other coronaviruses. Okay, MERS appeared in 2012. SARS appeared in 2002. They were way worse than the current coronavirus that's causing, they're saying, COVID-19. And they are on the World Health Organization's list of priority diseases. So they have, according to the World Health Organization, they're some of the biggest threats, and they're working the hardest to get these vaccines developed. And of course, there's tons of money in them, so they have a giant incentive. These companies that are developing the vaccines have a giant incentive to actually get them developed, and no liability. So you do the math there. In spite of all that, they haven't been able to develop one for almost 20 years in the case of SARS. So not going to happen anytime soon. I did find some really interesting stuff about those two diseases. Well, mainly just MERS, because I didn't... Honestly, I got into reading this, and I was just... Again, this stuff is just dumb. So, MERS comes from camels. First, it comes from the natural reservoir, like all these coronaviruses, is bats. So we're going to get into that a little bit. But every primary case of MERS that they were able to establish, they believe came from a camel. So it went from a bat to a camel to a human, and then it had a very high death rate. I think it was, anyway, it was high. It was higher than you want it to be. But then once they get into the secondary infection, so that's that's what they call like community transmission in the current coronavirus dialogue. Those had like a very low death rate. I don't think anybody even died from a secondary transmission of MERS. So every single person who got a serious case of MERS got it from a camel. That is what the science says about this disease. And however, they don't know how that happened. They have theories, but they were never actually able to prove the method by which this disease jumped from the camel to the human. Let alone how it jumped from the bat to a camel. And a really interesting little side note there is when I was looking up these studies, just on the different, scientific websites, I found more than a handful of studies where the title just said something like, bats communicate these illnesses amongst themselves very easily, but it's very hard for a bat to communicate a disease to another species. So that's looking in a laboratory setting where they're trying to figure out what the actual chemical method is, what receptors the diseases target. But think about it. How does a bat come in contact with another organism? Okay, think about it. Bats live in caves. Okay, they live in big colonies all by themselves, so it's really easy to see. You know, if one of them gets sick, they're so close together, it's going to cough on the other bat, and that's going to spread like wildfire. But how does a bat come in contact with a camel? Unless, you know, it's a vampire bat or something. How does a bat come in contact with human? You know, it's not like the kind of thing where pigs and chickens and humans are all living together on a farm. You know, it's just very strange. It's highly unlikely, and they're telling us that the wet market scenario is where this Wuhan thing came from. But just think about it. What is the probability? Yeah. Anyway, moving on. So the second issue with why there will never be a coronavirus vaccine is a little more involved, and I'm going to get into some scientific concepts, you know, to make it make sense for y'all. And the scientific concept is something called Koch's postulates, and this is just, they say, the gold standard for how to prove that a pathogen is causing a disease. Okay, so it's a four postulates. The first is that you isolate the organism from the host. The second is that you grow the organism on a sterile medium. So that's like a gel, like a petri dish. And the third is you take what you've grown and you inject it into a healthy organism and you cause the same symptoms. Follow me? The fourth and final is that you take it out of the thing you've just infected it into and you do the same thing again. You isolate it and you grow it. You identify it, okay? So that's how you link those things together. That's how you link the symptoms with the causative organism. Okay, so what's the problem with doing that with a virus? Well, viruses require a host to reproduce, so you can't have a sterile culture of a virus. So Koch's postulates break down when we're looking at examining viruses. So I looked at an interesting study called Amending Koch's Postulates for Viral Disease, when growth in pure culture leads to a loss in virulence. The author was Dr. Prescott et al., and Prescott works at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, so that's where our boy Fauci works at. So that's where this is coming from. And basically, it's talking about the considerations we have to look into for developing viral cultures for laboratory study, and it's had some interesting points. And basically, the whole thing is that when a virus reproduces in a host, it takes on some of the attributes of that host, and so you've got to consider that when you're trying to grow it, to learn more about it. So, as the title suggests, the main point is they're saying that it can lead to a reduction in virulence, which means it's not going to cause the disease you're trying to study. So that's a big problem. As an aside, it also can increase the virulence. So that's just kind of like a wacky Frankenstein's monster kind of thing. When we're thinking about emerging diseases, when we're thinking about new diseases, is it plausible that they can come from this process of growing a virus in a novel host? I would say a big yeah. In fact, this study says that. But anyway, so the takeaway is that according to science, when you study a virus, you want to study it in conditions which are as close to the natural conditions in which it reproduces as possible. So that means you want to culture it in its reservoir species. So in the case of coronaviruses, that's bats. So the big problem then is that there are no bat colonies for this research. So they have cages full of mice. I mean, just entire buildings full of mice. Buildings full of hedgehogs, pigs, monkeys, guinea pigs, goats, sheep, you name it. They have, they're called model animals or animal models for anything you would want to study. Bats, however, are just hard to grow in captivity because I guess it's just because they're finicky. They eat insects and they catch their meals on the wing. So at any rate, they don't have these kind of colonies. I found one bat colony at the, let's see, Colorado State University, I want to say. I reached out to the fellow. He didn't get back to me. So, yeah, I don't have the data there. That was Jamaican fruit bats is what he's doing. But you look at all the research that Colorado State lab has put out, and it's all basic research. It's into the serology and the hematology of these bats. So they're just looking at getting the baseline data for this particular species so they can then use it as a model organism. So, promising for sure, but, we're easily years off from that producing any kind of applicable data. So I had to mention this because it's just kind of funny. There is a bat colony at the Colorado State University, which is comprised of a native bat species and native Colorado bats, brown bat or something. And this just illustrates an interesting point. So in this year, actually, February, just a couple months ago, Colorado State University, this lab accidentally killed 3 bats. So what happened is they keep them in the basement and they're allowed to fly out at night, and they keep them on curtains. They live on curtains they cling to when they're sleeping. And some worker was cleaning the curtains, took them down to launder them, and he didn't realize that there were bats. There were 3 bats in the curtain, and the bats, unfortunately, apparently went through the laundry. And this is, and passed away. And this is a violation of the Animal Welfare Act in the United States. So Colorado State University has paid some fines for similar offenses over the years. So, but, the point is we're not allowed to kill bats in the United States to study them. And I don't think there's at least no, laboratory colonies of bats where we could grow them and get as many as we need to. So, for example, how many do we need if we were to do this? In the United States, they kill over 70,000 monkeys a year for laboratory studies. And I'm not going to say that's right or wrong. It's just the point is to demonstrate the magnitude of the need in terms of organisms for this kind of research. So you can't kill a bat to study it. All you can do is what they call non-lethal sampling, which is where you take any kind of secretion or dropping that the bat produces. So all this data, mind you, that they have on coronaviruses coming from bats comes from people going into caves in the wild and collecting their droppings or their saliva. So that's everything we have about bats, everything we have about the coronaviruses in bats. As far as I can tell, if you have some information to add there, please write me an email and let me know. But that's what I was able to ascertain about the state of bats as a model organism. So, back to the coronavirus. Yeah, I don't know what to say. The numbers are just not adding up. The science is just not adding up. It's just leading towards this whole mandatory vaccination scenario, and I think that's kind of what I'm worried about. So I'm not worried about dying of coronavirus, certainly of COVID-19, but I am wearing a mask when I go out because I don't want to get sick at all, because I don't want to get tested and test positive for, you know, what some people are saying is just a test for really any cold virus or even influenza or even some protein that is produced in my own body, and that they might be able to use as a justification to get me this mandatory vaccination. I mean, this is the whole mark of the beast scenario that the Bible talks about. And here we are. And so anyway, 2 reasons that the coronavirus vaccine will never exist. Number 1 is just that the coronavirus per se, as a quote-unquote species, mutates too fast for the vaccine to ever be effective. And number 2, we can't grow bats in the laboratory, which is where it reproduces. So we're just out of luck. So sorry about that, everyone. You better just wash your hands and, you know, keep taking the zinc and the vitamin C, because that, you know, seems to work. All right, and that's going to be it for this installment of Dogg from Air. Please share this video, and please subscribe to my channel. And if you feel like supporting in any way, that would be a great help. This has been Evan-Benton of Dogg from Air. Thank you and good night.